Hand over your pension or I'll throw you on the streets. My own son screamed this at me while I was getting chemotherapy. I'm Samson Williams, 69 years old, fighting stage 3 lung cancer. 8 months ago, doctors said I had a chance. What they didn't say was that my diagnosis would turn my only child into a vulture. Brian saw my pension payments as his personal ATM, $2,100 monthly. He needed it for gambling debts I wasn't supposed to know about. While cancer poison dripped through my IV, he calculated my death timeline. While I fought for every breath, he fought for every dollar. So I did something that destroyed his world completely. I packed one suitcase and disappeared. The panic call I got the next morning? Priceless. You know what's crazy about family? Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones trying to profit from your pain. If that hits close to home, I'd love to hear your story too. Drop a comment and subscribe if you're ready for some serious family justice. This is what happens when a dying father stops being convenient prey. Let me back up to March 15th, 2024. That's the day Dr. Rowan Clark at Presbyterian Hospital told me those 3 words that change everything. You have cancer, stage 3 lung cancer, 40 years of postal service, and my lungs finally gave out. The treatment plan was aggressive, chemotherapy every 2 weeks, radiation, medications that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. The good news, Dr. Clark said, is that you have excellent insurance through your postal pension. The bad news is, this will be the fight of your life. I called Brian that afternoon. My son lived 3 miles away in a studio apartment, worked part-time at a car dealership, always seemed stressed about money. I figured he'd want to know about his father's cancer diagnosis. Dad, that's terrible, he said. But then after a pause, what does this mean for your finances? Not, how are you feeling? Not, what can I do to help? His first concern was money. I should have seen the warning signs then. The first red flag came 2 weeks later. My initial chemo appointment was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Brian said he'd drive me since the medications might make me dizzy. He never showed up. I took a taxi. Sat in that cold treatment room for 4 hours while chemicals flowed through my IV. Other patients had family members holding their hands, bringing them blankets, talking quietly to help pass the time. I had a 20-year-old magazine and the sound of machines beeping. When I got home that evening, Brian was waiting in my kitchen. How'd it go, Dad? Where were you? I asked. You said you'd drive me. Something came up at work. Emergency shift. But hey, since you're feeling okay, can we talk about something important? He pulled out a manila folder. Inside were printouts from my bank's website showing my pension deposits. $2,100. Direct deposit. First of every month. I've been thinking about your situation, Brian said. Medical bills are going to pile up. You might get confused with all these medications. Maybe I should handle your finances for a while. Handle my finances? Just temporarily. You know, make sure bills get paid, that kind of thing. I could set up automatic transfers so you don't have to worry about anything. I looked at those bank statements. Brian had clearly been researching my income for weeks. I can handle my own bills, I said. His face tightened. Dad, you're sick. Really sick. You need to think practically here. The second red flag came 3 weeks later. I was supposed to get blood work done before my next chemo session. The lab called to say my insurance had been declined. There must be some mistake, I told them. When I called my insurance company, they explained that someone had tried to add an authorized user to my account. The request was denied because it wasn't submitted properly, but it had flagged my file for review. Who submitted the request? I asked. A Brian Williams. Says he's your son. I hadn't authorized any such request. That evening, Brian showed up again. This time, he brought takeout Chinese food, acting like nothing had happened. Dad, we need to talk about getting me on your insurance account, he said between bites of lo mein. What if something happens during one of your treatments? What if you're unconscious and I need to make medical decisions? There are forms for that, I said. Medical power of attorney. That's different from financial access. It's all connected, though. Medical decisions cost money. I just want to be able to help. But here's what Brian didn't know. I'd been married to his mother for 38 years before she passed 3 years ago. Rowan Williams was a bookkeeper. She taught me to pay attention to details, to keep records, to notice when numbers don't add up. I'd been noticing a lot of things lately. Like how Brian only visited when my pension check arrived. like how he always steered conversations toward my financial planning, like how he asked detailed questions about my life insurance policy. The third red flag was the biggest one. I was feeling sick after a particularly rough chemo session, so I asked Brian to pick up my prescription refills. 8 different medications, including pain pills that cost $89 even with insurance. He brought back 7 bottles. They were out of the pain medication, he said. Should be ready tomorrow. But when I called the pharmacy, they said all 8 prescriptions had been picked up at the same time. Sir, everything was released to your son around 2 p.m., the pharmacist confirmed. Brian had kept my pain medication, the expensive stuff, the pills that had resale value. That night, I couldn't sleep, not just from the cancer pain, but from a deeper ache, the realization that my own son was stealing from me while I fought for my life. I started keeping a notebook, writing down dates, times, conversations. Rowan had always said, "Document everything, Samson. Memory fades, but paper remembers." The notebook was about to become very important. By November, my cancer treatment had become routine. Every 2 weeks, I'd take a taxi to Presbyterian Hospital, sit in the oncology wing for 4 hours, come home exhausted. The drugs were working. My latest scan showed the tumors shrinking, but the side effects were brutal. Nausea, fatigue, hair falling out in clumps. Some days I could barely get out of bed. Brian's visits became more frequent and more demanding. "Dad, you're spending $847 a month just on treatment costs," he said one afternoon, reading from a stack of my medical bills. "That's not counting prescriptions or taxi rides to appointments." He'd been going through my mail. "How do you know my treatment costs?" I asked. "I'm trying to help. Look at these numbers." He spread the bills across my kitchen table like evidence in a trial. "Your pension is $2,100. Social Security is $1,320. That's $3,420 total income. Take out rent, utilities, food, medical costs. You're barely breaking even." The math was correct. Brian had always been good with numbers. "What's your point?" I asked. "My point is that you're one medical emergency away from bankruptcy. What if you need surgery? What if the cancer spreads and you need experimental treatment?" These were legitimate concerns. Cancer is expensive, but Brian wasn't offering to help with medical costs. He was building a case for financial control. "There's another issue we need to discuss," he continued. "Your life insurance policy?" He pulled out another folder. Somehow, he'd obtained a copy of my $15,000 policy through the Postal Service. "Dad, this policy expires when you turn 70. That's 8 months away. If something happens to you after your birthday, there's no payout. I know when my policy expires." "Do you? Because you've been forgetting a lot of things lately. Last week you asked me the same question 3 times. This wasn't true. I'd asked him once about his work schedule, and he'd given me 3 different answers. Brian, what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to be practical. You're sick, really sick. The doctors can't guarantee how long the treatment will work." He leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "If you sign over power of attorney to me, I can manage everything. Pay your bills on time. Handle the insurance paperwork. Make sure your money lasts as long as possible." "And what's in this for you?" "Dad, I'm trying to help family here." But I knew about Brian's gambling problem. 3 months earlier, I'd driven past the casino downtown and seen his beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot. This was a Tuesday afternoon when he'd told me he was working. I'd also found betting slips in my bathroom trash can after one of his visits. Sports bets. $500 on a football game, $800 on basketball, always losing numbers. "How much do you owe?" I asked directly. "What? I don't owe anything." "Brian, I've seen the betting slips. I know you've been gambling." His entire demeanor changed. The helpful sun mask slipped away. "Okay, fine, I have some debts. Everybody has debts. That doesn't change the fact that you need help managing your finances." "How much?" "It's not your problem. If you want access to my money, it becomes my problem. How much do you owe?" A long pause, then $12,000. $12,000. Almost 6 months of my pension income. "To who?" "Does it matter? Dad, I can work this out. But I need some stability first. I need to know that family money is being protected. Family money. That's what my pension had become to him. Not my survival fund. Not my medical treatment money, family money that he deserved access to. The answer is no, I said. That's when his voice changed completely. Dad, you're not thinking clearly. The cancer, the medications, they're affecting your judgment. You need someone to make responsible decisions. The threat was clear. He was setting up a narrative that I was mentally incompetent. That's when I realized how serious this had become. Thanksgiving dinner 2024 was when everything exploded. Brian had insisted on cooking at my apartment. Family tradition, he said. But I knew the real reason. He wanted privacy for another financial conversation. He brought his girlfriend Stephanie, a nervous woman who barely made eye contact. They arrived at 2 p.m. with grocery bags and a manila folder that I was beginning to dread. Dad, we need to talk seriously today, Brian announced while pulling a frozen turkey from my freezer. No more dancing around the issue. What issue? Your financial situation is unsustainable. He cooked. I sat in my recliner feeling nauseous from that morning's medication. Stephanie sat on my couch scrolling through her phone, clearly uncomfortable. The meal was tense. Brian kept steering conversation toward money, medical costs, planning for the future. Every few minutes he'd make comments about my confusion or forgetfulness. Dad asked me the same question twice yesterday, he told Stephanie, loud enough for me to hear. The medications are really affecting his memory. This was a lie. I hadn't asked him any questions yesterday because he hadn't visited. After dinner, Brian cleared the table and opened his folder. Okay, here's the situation. He pulled out a power of attorney document, already filled out, ready for my signature. Sign this and I'll handle everything. Bills, medical decisions, insurance claims. You won't have to worry about anything. Brian, I told you no. Dad, you're not understanding the gravity here. Your medical costs are escalating. The insurance company is starting to question some claims. If you miss payments or make errors, you could lose coverage. I haven't missed any payments. Yet. But what happens when you're too sick to think straight? What happens when you're in the hospital for weeks? Stephanie shifted uncomfortably. Even she seemed to recognize this was getting aggressive. The smart move, Brian continued, is to set up safeguards now, while you're still relatively healthy. The smart move is for me to handle my own affairs. That's when Brian's voice got sharp. Dad, you're dying. The words hung in the air like a slap. You're dying, and you're being selfish. You think this only affects you? What happens to your bills when you're gone? Who pays for the funeral? Who deals with the debt you're piling up? I'm not piling up debt. $847 a month in medical costs every month. For how long? 6 months? A year? 2 years? He was calculating my death timeline based on expenses. Brian, you need to leave. No, we're having this conversation today. He pulled out another document, a bank form for adding an authorized user to my checking account. Sign these papers, or I'm petitioning the court to declare you mentally incompetent. Stephanie looked up from her phone. Even she seemed shocked by this threat. You can't do that, I said. I can and I will. I have documentation of your confusion, your poor financial decisions, your inability to manage your medical care properly. What documentation? I've been keeping records, Dad. Every time you ask the same question twice, every missed appointment, every time you can't remember what medications you've taken. These were all lies, but Brian said them with such confidence that even I started doubting myself for a moment. I'll get medical professionals to testify that the cancer and medications have compromised your judgment. I'll show the court that you're vulnerable to financial exploitation. The irony was stunning. He was threatening to protect me from exploitation by exploiting me. Here's what's going to happen, Brian continued, his voice now cold and methodical. You're going to sign over power of attorney. You're going to add me to your bank accounts. And you're going to do it today. Or what? Or I'll make sure you end up in a state nursing home where you belong. That was the line he couldn't uncross. I reached under my chair cushion and pulled out a small digital recorder. Sony brand, $99 at Best Buy. I'd been keeping it there for 3 weeks. Brian's face went white when he saw it. Did you just record this conversation? I've been recording all our conversations. You can't do that. That's illegal. Actually, in Colorado, only one party needs to consent to recording. I consent. I ejected the memory card and held it up. This card contains 6 conversations where you've threatened me, lied about my mental state, and demanded access to my money. Stephanie stood up. Brian, we should go. Dad, you're making a huge mistake. No, son. You're the one who made the mistake. I walked to my front door and opened it. Get out, both of you. This isn't over, Brian said as he gathered his papers. Yes, it is. But I was wrong. It was just beginning. That night, after Brian and Stephanie left, I sat in my recliner listening to the recordings. 6 conversations. 4 hours of audio. All of it documented Brian's escalating demands, threats about mental incompetence, and lies about my behavior. But the recordings were just the beginning of what I'd been collecting. 3 days later, I had my regular chemo appointment. This time I took the city bus instead of a taxi, not because I couldn't afford the taxi, but because I needed to make a stop first. The Adams County Adult Protective Services office sits in a gray building downtown, between a bail bondsman and a check-cashing store. I'd never imagined I'd need their services. I'd like to report suspected financial elder abuse, I told the receptionist. Linda Davis, the intake coordinator, was a woman about my daughter-in-law's age with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes in a thick folder. Mr. Williams, how long has this been going on? About 6 months since my cancer diagnosis. Has your son physically threatened you? Not physically, but he's threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent if I don't give him financial control. I played her selected portions of the recordings. Her expression grew more serious with each threat. Do you have other documentation? I pulled out my notebook. Rowan had taught me well. Every incident was recorded with dates, times, and details. October 8th, Brian attempted unauthorized insurance account access. October 15th, stole my pain medication. November 3rd, went through my mail without permission. November 22nd, threatened court action for mental incompetency. Linda reviewed my notes carefully. Mr. Williams, I need you to understand something. If we open an investigation, this becomes official. Your son could face criminal charges for financial exploitation of an elderly person. I understand. Are you sure you want to proceed? The question hung in the air. This was my son, my only child, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, helped with homework, walked to school every morning for 12 years. But this wasn't that boy anymore. Yes, I want to proceed. Linda opened a new case file. APS 2024-8876. We'll need to interview you formally, and we'll want to speak with medical professionals who've witnessed your son's behavior. Dr. Rowan Clark. She's my oncologist. She's seen everything. That afternoon at my chemo appointment, I had a private conversation with Dr. Clark. Sampson, I've been wondering when you'd bring this up, she said while reviewing my chart. In 6 months of treatment, your son has attended exactly 2 of your 24 appointments. You've been counting? We notice these things. Family involvement often correlates with patient outcomes, but it's not just his absence that concerns me. She pulled up notes on her computer. The times he has been here, his questions were exclusively about insurance coverage, treatment costs, and prognosis. He asked me directly how long you're expected to live. He asked you that? Twice. Most family members ask about comfort, pain management, quality of life. He asked about timeline and financial implications. Dr. Clark printed out her notes and handed them to me. If someone ever questions your mental competency, these records show you've been alert, engaged, and making informed decisions about your treatment throughout this process. That evening, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Eleanor Patterson, an elder law attorney that Linda Davis had recommended. Mr. Williams, based on what you've described, you may want to consider revoking any existing power of attorney documents and creating new ones that specifically exclude your son. How quickly can we do that? If you're serious about this, we can have papers drawn up within 48 hours. The second call was to James Morrison, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. I need documentation of my son's gambling debts, I told him, and I need it quickly. How quickly? I have a feeling he's going to escalate this situation soon. Morrison's report arrived by email 2 days later. $12,000 debt to a loan company that charges 30% interest. 17 casino visits in the past month. Credit cards maxed out. Rent 3 months behind. Brian wasn't just financially desperate. He was drowning. And drowning people will grab onto anything to stay afloat, even if it means pulling someone else under. December 15th was my last scheduled chemo session before Christmas break. The oncology ward was decorated with paper snowflakes and fake garland. trying to make cancer treatment feel festive. I arrived early for my 10 a.m. appointment, settled into my usual chair in the infusion bay, and pulled out a book while the nurses prepared my IV medications. At 10:30, Brian walked in. I hadn't spoken to him since Thanksgiving, 3 weeks earlier. He looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. "Dad, we need to talk. I'm receiving medical treatment. That's exactly what we need to discuss." He pulled up a chair next to my recliner. Other patients glanced over curiously. The infusion bay was an open room with 8 treatment chairs arranged in a circle. Privacy was limited. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Brian said, loud enough for others to hear. "I think you're right that we should handle this as a family." This was not what I'd expected. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe I was being too pushy about the financial stuff. You're the father. You should make your own decisions." The nurse Jennifer approached with my medication bag. She'd been my regular nurse for 6 months and knew our family situation. "How are you doing today, Samson?" she asked, hanging the IV bag on my pole. "Fine, thank you." "And Brian, good to see you again." Brian smiled. "Thanks. I'm trying to be here more often for Dad's treatments." This was a performance, but for whose benefit? After Jennifer left, Brian continued. "Dad, I owe you an apology. I've been stressed about work and I took it out on you." "Work stress?" "Yeah, actually that's what I wanted to discuss. I lost my job at the dealership last week." Here it comes, I thought. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Thanks, it's okay though. I'll find something else. But in the meantime, I was wondering if you could help me out." "Help you how?" "Just a small loan, to cover rent until I get back on my feet." Brian was now using a completely different strategy. Instead of demanding control, he was asking for direct cash. "How much?" "Maybe 800, just for December rent." An elderly woman in the chair across from us was pretending to read, but clearly listening to our conversation. "Brian, I told you my financial situation is tight." "I know, but this is temporary. I'll pay you back as soon as I find work." "When was the last time you paid me back money you borrowed?" His face flushed. "Dad, that's not fair. It's a simple question. When?" A long pause. Other patients were definitely listening now. "Look, this is different. This is rent. I could end up homeless. You could get a job." "I'm trying to get a job, but that takes time, and rent is due this week." His voice was getting louder. Jennifer glanced over from the nurse's station. "Brian, lower your voice. This is a medical facility." "Sorry, but Dad, you have to understand. I'm desperate here." "Desperate enough to steal my pain medication?" The words came out before I could stop them. But I was tired of pretending this was just about unemployment. Brian's face went white. "What are you talking about?" "November 8th. You picked up 8 prescription bottles from Walgreens. You only brought me 7. "That's ridiculous." "I have the pharmacy receipt, Brian, and I called to confirm." The woman across from us had given up pretending to read. She was staring openly now. "Dad, you're confused. The cancer medication is affecting your memory." "My memory is fine." "No, it's not. You've been saying strange things for months." Brian was now projecting his voice, making sure everyone in the infusion bay could hear him. "You asked me the same question 5 times last week. You forgot what day it was. Yesterday you called me by your brother's name." These were all lies, but Brian was saying them with such conviction that I could see other patients starting to look at me with sympathy. "Brian, stop. I'm worried about you, Dad. Really worried. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Clark about your mental state." That's when Jennifer intervened. "Excuse me," she said, approaching our chairs. "I need to check Mr. Williams' vitals." She wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm, but her real purpose was to interrupt Brian's performance. "Samson, how are you feeling today?" she asked pointedly. "Any confusion or memory issues?" "No confusion, no memory issues." "Have you been taking your medications as prescribed?" "Yes." "Any questions about your treatment plan?" "No questions." Jennifer made eye contact with me while taking my blood pressure. She'd clearly heard enough to understand what was happening. "Brian," she said, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" They walked to the far corner of the infusion bay. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see Jennifer's expression growing stern, while Brian gestured defensively. When they returned, Brian's demeanor had completely changed. Dad, I think I should let you finish your treatment in peace, he said stiffly. That would be best. But we're not done discussing this. We need to talk about your living situation, your medical care, your finances. This can't continue. After Brian left, Jennifer returned to check my IV. Samson, are you okay? I'm fine. Is there anything you need? Anyone I can call? Actually, yes. Could you document this conversation in my medical chart? Of course. And Jennifer, if my son calls asking about my mental status or requesting medical information, please don't provide it. We wouldn't without your written consent anyway, but I had a feeling Brian was going to try. The next morning my phone rang at 6:23 a.m. Dad, I've been thinking all night, Brian said without preamble. The situation is out of control. What situation? Your health, your finances, your judgment. I can't stand by and watch you destroy yourself. Brian, it's 6 in the morning. I don't care what time it is. This is important. His voice had the manic energy of someone who hadn't slept. Hand over your entire pension or sleep on the streets. Those are your only options. The threat that would change everything. Hand over your entire pension or sleep on the streets. Brian's ultimatum hit me like a physical blow, but unlike previous threats, this one was different. Desperate. Final. What did you say? You heard me, Dad. I'm done playing games. Sign over your pension payments to me, or figure out how to survive on your own. It was 6:23 a.m. on December 16th. I was sitting in my recliner, still connected to my portable oxygen concentrator, trying to process this escalation. Brian, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I need that money and I need it now. For gambling debts. For survival. Dad, you're going to die anyway. Probably within a year based on what Dr. Clark told me. Dr. Clark never told you that. She didn't have to. I can see it. You're getting weaker every week. Why should that money sit in your account when I could use it to build a life? There it was. The truth, finally spoken out loud. A life built on your dying father's pension. A life built on practical planning. You raised me to be practical, didn't you? I raised you to be decent. Decent doesn't pay rent, Dad. I was recording this conversation just like all the others. But this time felt different. This felt like the end of something. So what's it going to be? Brian continued. You can make this easy and sign the papers, or you can make this hard and force me to take legal action. What legal action? Mental competency hearing. I have documentation of your confusion, your poor judgment, your inability to manage your affairs. You have documentation of lies. I have witnesses, Dad, medical professionals who've seen your decline. This was news to me. What witnesses? People at the hospital, staff members who've noticed your behavior. Another lie. Jennifer and the other nurses had been nothing but supportive of my autonomy. Brian, you're delusional. Am I? We'll see what a judge thinks. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. You know what, Brian? You're right. I'm right. Yes, I can't handle this anymore. The stress, the medical bills, the constant worry about money. There was a pause. Brian hadn't expected me to agree. So you'll sign the papers? I'll do better than that. I'm going to remove myself from this situation entirely. I stood up and walked to my bedroom carrying the phone with me. What does that mean? It means I'm leaving. I pulled my navy blue suitcase from the closet and started packing. 12 minutes later, everything I needed was inside. Dad, what are you doing? You said my choices were to hand over my pension or sleep on the streets. I choose the streets. That's ridiculous. You can't survive on your own. Watch me. I disconnected the oxygen concentrator and switched to a portable unit, grabbed my medications from the bathroom, left my apartment keys on the kitchen counter. Dad, you're being dramatic. No, Brian, I'm being practical. You taught me that, remember? Where are you going to go? That's not your concern anymore. But I knew exactly where I was going, and who would be waiting for me. 3 weeks earlier, during one of my conversations with Linda Davis at Adult Protective Services, she'd mentioned emergency housing options for seniors experiencing abuse. We have partnerships with several facilities, she'd explained. If you ever need to leave your living situation quickly, we can arrange immediate placement. I'd also been in contact with Eleanor Patterson, the elder law attorney. She'd prepared documents that I'd hoped never to use. Mr. Williams, she'd said during our consultation. If this situation escalates, you need to be ready to act decisively. Financial predators rely on their victims feeling trapped. Now, walking to my car with my suitcase, I realized I wasn't trapped at all. My first stop was the bank. I withdrew my maximum daily limit, $500, and closed my joint checking account that Brian had been pressuring me to create. My second stop was Eleanor Patterson's office. I need to execute those documents we discussed, I told her receptionist. 20 minutes later, I'd signed new power of attorney papers that specifically excluded Brian, updated my will to remove him as beneficiary, and filed for a restraining order based on financial elder abuse. These will be processed within 48 hours, Eleanor explained. But Mr. Williams, are you sure you want to take this step? I'm sure. My third stop was Presbyterian Hospital. Dr. Clark was between patients and agreed to see me immediately. Sampson, what's happening? I need you to document that I'm mentally competent to make my own decisions. Of course you are. Why would you need documentation? I explained Brian's threats about mental competency hearings. Dr. Clark's expression grew stern. Sampson, that's not how competency works. Your son can't just declare you incompetent. It requires medical evaluation, court proceedings, substantial evidence. Could you provide a written assessment of my mental state? Absolutely. She spent 15 minutes conducting a cognitive assessment, asking questions about dates, current events, mathematical calculations, decision-making scenarios. Sampson, you scored perfectly on every measure, she said, printing out the results. I'll also include a letter stating that throughout your cancer treatment, you've demonstrated consistent sound judgment and clear thinking. My fourth stop was the Adult Protective Services office. Mr. Williams, Linda Davis seemed surprised to see me with a suitcase. What's happened? My son escalated his threats this morning. I need to activate emergency housing. Linda reviewed my case file, made several phone calls, and within an hour had arranged temporary placement at a senior community facility. This is just until we can coordinate a more permanent solution, she explained. But you'll be safe here, and your son won't have access. That evening, I sat in my temporary room at Maple Grove Senior Community, unpacking my few belongings. The facility was clean, comfortable, and most importantly, Brian had no idea where I was. My phone had been ringing constantly since I'd left my apartment. 17 missed calls, all from Brian. I listened to the voicemails. Dad, this is ridiculous. Come home and we'll talk. Dad, I'm worried about you. Where are you? Dad, you're making a huge mistake. Call me back. Dad, I'm going to call the police if you don't answer. Dad, I know you think you're teaching me a lesson, but this is dangerous. You need your medication, your oxygen, your medical equipment. The desperation in his voice was growing with each message. The final voicemail came at 11:47 p.m. Dad, please. I'm sorry about this morning. I was stressed and I said things I didn't mean. Just come home and we'll figure this out. But it was too late for apologies. Tomorrow, Brian would discover that his dying father wasn't as powerless as he'd believed. December 17th started with a phone call that would change Brian's life forever. At 9:15 a.m., while I was eating breakfast at Maple Grove Senior Community, my son received a certified letter from Eleanor Patterson's law office. I know this because Eleanor called me immediately after her courier confirmed delivery. Mr. Williams, the documents have been served. Your son is now legally notified that his power of attorney has been revoked. You've been removed from his emergency contact lists, and a restraining order is pending approval. How long until the restraining order is active? Based on the evidence you've provided, I expect approval within 24 hours. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Brian's number. Dad, what the hell is this legal document? It's exactly what it says. You can't revoke my power of attorney. I never had power of attorney. No, but you were attempting to get it through fraud and coercion. Now there's legal documentation preventing any future attempts. This is insane. You're acting crazy. Brian, I'm acting legally. There's a difference. Dad, where are you? I went to your apartment and you're not there. I'm somewhere safe. What does that mean? It means you no longer have access to me or my finances. I could hear panic creeping into his voice. Dad, we need to talk about this, face to face. No, we don't. Yes, we do. You can't just disappear because we had an argument. It wasn't an argument, Brian. It was extortion. That's ridiculous. Is it?
I have recordings of you threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent if I didn't give you financial control. A long pause. Those recordings are illegal. No, they're not. I checked with my attorney. Your attorney? Dad, you're really losing it if you think you need a lawyer to deal with family issues. I needed a lawyer to deal with financial elder abuse. Financial elder abuse? Are you serious? Dead serious. Case number APS 2024-8876 with Adams County Adult Protective Services. The silence on the other end told me Brian was finally beginning to understand the scope of what was happening.
Dad, you reported me to Adult Protective Services? I reported financial exploitation and threats against a vulnerable adult. The fact that you're my son makes it worse, not better. This is unbelievable. I was trying to help you. You were trying to help yourself to my money. My second call came from Linda Davis at APS. Mr. Williams, we've received some interesting information from your son. What kind of information? He's claiming that you're missing, that you've been kidnapped or coerced into leaving your home. He knows that's not true. Of course, but he's also requesting an emergency welfare check, claiming that your mental state has deteriorated and you're incapable of making rational decisions. This was Brian's countermove. If he couldn't get my money voluntarily, he'd try to get it through claiming I was incompetent. What happens now? We'll conduct a welfare check as required, but based on your cognitive assessment from Dr. Clark and our documentation of his threats, this appears to be retaliation rather than genuine concern. When will the welfare check happen? This afternoon. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared. At 2 p.m., Linda Davis arrived at Maple Grove with a police officer and a social worker I hadn't met before. They interviewed me for 45 minutes, reviewing my timeline of events, my decision-making process, my current living arrangements, and my plans for ongoing medical care. Mr. Williams, the social worker concluded, you appear to be making informed, rational decisions about your safety and welfare. We see no evidence of diminished capacity or coercion. What does this mean for the investigation into my son? The investigation continues. His attempt to use emergency services to locate and access you actually strengthens the case that he's been trying to control your finances and living situation. That evening, Brian made one final desperate attempt. He showed up at Maple Grove's front desk, demanding to see me. I'm sorry, the receptionist told him, but Mr. Williams has requested no visitors without prior approval. I'm his son. I understand, but we have strict policies about respecting residents' wishes. This is ridiculous. I need to see my father. He's making terrible decisions. Sir, if you continue to raise your voice, I'll need to call security. I watched this interaction through a window overlooking the lobby. Brian looked terrible, unshaven, agitated, desperate, but for the first time in months, I felt completely safe. At 6 p.m., Eleanor Patterson called with the final piece of news. Sampson, your restraining order has been approved. Your son is now legally prohibited from contacting you directly, attempting to access your financial accounts, or interfering with your medical care. What if he violates the order? Then he'll be arrested. That night, I slept better than I had in 8 months. Not just because of the comfortable bed or the secure facility, but because I'd finally stopped being afraid of my own son. December 18th brought consequences that Brian never saw coming. At 7:30 a.m., while I was taking my morning medications in the safety of Maple Grove, my son was dealing with the first domino falling in what would become a complete collapse of his financial house of cards. 2 investigators from Adams County Adult Protective Services arrived at Brian's apartment with a search warrant. I learned about this from Linda Davis, who called me that afternoon with an update. Mr. Williams, we found some interesting evidence in your son's possession. What kind of evidence? Financial documents related to your accounts that he shouldn't have had access to. Bank statements, insurance paperwork, copies of your medical bills. He'd been systematically collecting information about your finances for months. What does that prove? Combined with your recordings and witness statements, it establishes a clear pattern of financial predation. Your son was building a case to control your money, not to protect you. The investigators also found something else. Brian's gambling records. He owes more than you thought, Linda continued. Not $12,000, $18,000 to 3 different creditors. One of those creditors was a loan company that charged 40% annual interest. Another was connected to online sports betting. The third was a private individual whose background check revealed connections to organized crime. Mr. Williams, your son is in serious financial trouble. The kind of trouble that makes people desperate enough to exploit their own family members. That afternoon, Brian's landlord received notice that his tenant was under investigation for elder abuse. While this wasn't grounds for eviction, it triggered a review of Brian's lease compliance. The landlord discovered that Brian was 3 months behind on rent, despite having told me he only needed money for December rent. Eviction proceedings began immediately, but Brian's problems were just starting. At 4 p.m., his former employer at the car dealership received a call from APS, asking about Brian's employment history and character references. "We're conducting a background investigation," Linda Davis explained to the sales manager. "We need to know about Mr. Williams's reliability, honesty, and any concerning behaviors." The sales manager was honest. Brian was terminated for missing work repeatedly and for borrowing money from coworkers that he never repaid. We suspected he had a gambling problem but couldn't prove it. This information went into Brian's APS file, further documenting his pattern of financial irresponsibility. At 5:30 p.m., Brian received a phone call that sent him into complete panic. One of his creditors, the private individual with the questionable background, had learned about the APS investigation through contacts in the legal system. "Williams, we need to talk," the voice said. "Today. I'm working on getting your money." "Are you?" "Because I heard your father cut you off. I heard you're under investigation. I heard your little family money scheme fell apart." Brian's blood pressure spiked. "Where did you hear that?" "I hear everything. Question is, how are you going to pay me without Daddy's pension? I'll figure something out. You have 48 hours. After that, we figure something out for you." The threat was clear. Brian had borrowed money from dangerous people using his father's pension as collateral. Now, that collateral was gone. That evening, Brian made a series of increasingly desperate phone calls. First, he called Dr. Clark's office, claiming to be concerned about his father's mental state and demanding medical information. "I'm sorry," the nurse told him, "but we can't release any patient information without written consent from Mr. Williams." "I'm his son. That doesn't give you legal access to medical records. He's missing. He could be in danger." "Sir, we've been informed that Mr. Williams is safe and has chosen not to have contact with you. If you continue calling, we'll consider it harassment." Next, Brian called my former apartment building, trying to convince the landlord to let him into my unit. "Maybe he left a note," Brian explained. "Maybe there's information about where he went." "I can't let you into another tenant's apartment," the landlord replied. "That would be illegal. But I'm his emergency contact." "Not according to the updated paperwork we received today." Brian was discovering that I'd been thorough in cutting his access to my life. Finally, in desperation, Brian called 911. "I need to report a missing person," he told the emergency operator. "What's the person's name and age?" "Samson Williams, 69 years old. He's my father, and he has cancer. He disappeared 2 days ago." "Has he been reported missing to the police?" "No, but..." "Sir, we've already received information about this situation from Adult Protective Services. Your father is not missing. He's relocated voluntarily due to family conflict." "That's not true. He's confused because of his medication." "Sir, according to our records, Mr. Williams has been evaluated by medical professionals and found to be mentally competent. He's chosen to limit contact with you. This is insane. Sir, if you continue to use emergency services to harass a family member who has requested no contact, you could be charged with misuse of 911 services." Brian hung up, realizing that every system he'd tried to manipulate was now working against him. December 19th brought the final collapse. Brian received an eviction notice, 7 days to vacate. His phone service was disconnected for non-payment. His car was repossessed in the parking lot of a casino where he'd gone to try to win enough money to pay his debts. Most importantly, he received a visit from police officers serving him with the official restraining order. "Mr. Williams, you are prohibited from contacting your father directly or indirectly," the officer explained. "This includes phone calls, emails, text messages, showing up at his residence, or attempting to contact him through third parties. What if there's a medical emergency? Medical emergencies can be handled through appropriate medical and legal channels. You are not to use emergency situations as an excuse to violate this order. What if he changes his mind and wants to see me? Then he'll need to petition the court to modify the restraining order. Until that happens, you maintain complete distance. That evening, Brian sat in his nearly empty apartment, surrounded by eviction notices and unpaid bills, finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd lost. Not just his father's money, his father, his home, his transportation, his safety from the dangerous people he owed money to, all because he'd mistaken a dying man's love for weakness. And the most devastating realization of all, his father wasn't weak. He'd been planning this response for months. Brian had been so focused on his father's cancer that he'd missed the real threat. A 69-year-old postal worker who'd spent 40 years following rules, keeping records, and solving problems methodically. A man who'd learned from his bookkeeper wife that the best defense against financial predators is documentation, legal preparation, and decisive action. Brian had tried to exploit his father's medical vulnerability. Instead, he'd awakened his father's survival instinct, and now he was facing the consequences of underestimating a dying man's determination to protect his dignity. The next morning, Brian would wake up homeless, phoneless, and hunted by creditors. His father would wake up safe, secure, and cancer-free for another day. 3 months later, I was sitting in Dr. Clark's office receiving the news I'd hardly dared to hope for. "Samson, your latest scans show continued improvement. The tumors have shrunk by 60%. What does that mean? It means the treatment is working better than we expected. It means you have time. Time. The one thing Brian had tried to steal from me by treating my remaining days as a countdown to inheritance. How much time? I can't give you exact numbers, but people with your response to treatment often live for years, not months. Years. Not the 6-month death sentence Brian had been planning around. I thought about this irony as I took the bus back to my new apartment. After 2 months at Maple Grove, I'd found a comfortable one-bedroom place in a senior community with on-site medical support. Independent, but not isolated. Safe, but not imprisoned. My mailbox contained the usual bills, medical appointment reminders, and a letter from Eleanor Patterson with an update on Brian's situation. The restraining order had been extended for another year. Adult Protective Services had closed their investigation with a finding of substantiated financial exploitation. Brian had been evicted from his apartment and was currently living in a homeless shelter. His gambling debts remained unpaid, though the criminal creditor had apparently moved on to other prey. Most importantly, he'd made no attempts to contact me directly or indirectly. The letter included one other piece of information that surprised me. Brian had enrolled in a gambling addiction program at the county mental health facility. Whether this was genuine recovery or simply a requirement for shelter placement, I didn't know. But it was something. That evening, Linda Davis called with her final update. "Mr. Williams, how are you adjusting to your new living situation?" "Very well. Thank you for everything you did. You did the hard part. Most people in your situation don't have the courage to take legal action against family members. Most people don't have a choice. Actually, they do. They just don't realize it. Your case is going to help us train other workers about financial elder abuse patterns." "How so?" "Your documentation, your recordings, your systematic approach to building a case. It's a textbook example of how to protect yourself while gathering evidence." This felt like Rowan's influence. Even 3 years after her death, my wife was still teaching me to keep good records. "Mr. Williams, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you miss your son?" I thought about this for a long time. I miss the boy he used to be, the child who needed bedtime stories and help with homework. I don't miss the man who tried to steal my pension while I was dying. "Do you think you'll ever reconcile?" "That depends on whether he becomes someone worth reconciling with." After Linda hung up, I sat in my comfortable chair, looking out the window at other seniors walking in the community garden. Many of them had stories similar to mine. Adult children who saw inheritance before relationship, families torn apart by money that seemed more important than time. But some of them also had stories of reconciliation. Children who'd hit bottom, gotten help, and rebuilt trust slowly over years. I thought about Brian in his homeless shelter, hopefully attending addiction meetings, maybe finally facing the choices that had led him here. Recovery was possible, forgiveness was possible, but trust would have to be earned back one day at a time. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer, my former chemo nurse. "Samson, thinking of you. How are you feeling?" "Cancer-free for 90 days, I texted back. "Living my best life." "That's wonderful. Any contact from Brian?" "No, and that's wonderful too." As I got ready for bed, I thought about the irony of survival. Brian had been so focused on my death that he'd missed my life. All those months he'd spent calculating my remaining pension payments, I'd been calculating my remaining days differently. Not as countdown to inheritance, but as countdown to healing. Not as burden on family, but as gift to myself. I'd learned that dying with dignity doesn't mean dying quietly. Sometimes it means fighting back. If you're watching this and dealing with family members who see your vulnerability as their opportunity, remember, you have more power than you think. Document everything. Trust professionals. Take legal action when necessary. And never forget that your life belongs to you, not to people who are waiting for it to end. Let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done in my situation?